We begin today's show in Western Massachusetts, where a judge ruled Thursday a panel on Palestinian rights can move forward. Not backing down: Israel, free speech, and the battle for Palestinian human rights. That's the title of the event set to take place Saturday at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. 3 anonymous UMass students filed a lawsuit to stop the event, claiming they will, quote, suffer irreparable harm if it takes place. But Judge Robert Ullman ruled Thursday the event can proceed, saying, quote, there's nothing that comes even close to a threat of harm or incitement to violence or lawlessness, he said. Meanwhile, the university has backed the event, despite the protests, saying it's committed to the principles of free speech and academic freedom. The event is co-sponsored by Jewish Voice for Peace. Group member and attorney responded to Thursday's decision, saying, quote, the judge ruled that to shut down this event would be to violate the First Amendment. But we also challenge the false premise that criticism of Israel is somehow inherently anti-Semitic. We have every right to criticize Israel's violations of Palestinian human rights. As members of JVP and as Jews, we stand in solidarity with the event and with the panelists, Rachel Weber said. Saturday's event will include several high-profile speakers, including Palestinian-American activist Linda Sarsour, who has faced death threats for her outspokenness, and Temple University professor Marc Lamont Hill, who was recently fired from CNN for speaking up for Palestinian rights. It will also include our guest today, who's joining us in our New York studio, Pink Floyd founder Roger Waters, co-founder of the group Pink Floyd. Also joining us, Rachel Weber, attorney and member of Jewish Voice for Peace of Western Massachusetts. And from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, we're joined by Sut Jolly, professor of communication at the university and founder and executive director of the Media Education Foundation, which organized the event. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Sut Jolly, let's begin with you. Thanks for joining us from your school, from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Can you explain what has taken place since the announcement of this panel for May 4th?
Yeah, good morning, Amy. Yeah, it's been a firestorm of criticism since we announced the panel. I know that the Chancellor and the administration have received scores of telephone calls protesting the event. The Massachusetts Republican Party has protested the event and wants to be cancelled. There was a letter written by 80 organizations, 80 right-wing organizations, demanding that the event be cancelled and that the university disassociate itself from anything to do with the event. And of course, as you just mentioned, there was this lawsuit that was filed by this right-wing organization on this, spurious notion that somehow talking about Israel-Palestine was going to cause harm to Jewish students. And so there's just been this firestorm of criticism.
What was the organization you understood brought the suit? I mean, it was brought on behalf of 3 anonymous University of Massachusetts students.
Yeah, that was just, I think that was just a scam. The lawsuit was brought by a group called Americans for Peace and Prosperity, which is a right-wing, really hate-filled group of reactionaries and bigots. And they started this about 4 weeks ago when they first heard about the panel. They then, I think, found some students at UMass to kind of front the injunction. But this is not a suit that's been brought by the students. This is a suit that is being brought by an external organization trying to shut down any kind of critical speech around Israel-Palestine. And I'm very happy that the university and the chancellor has held so firm to the principle of academic freedom and has not at all interfered with our planning for the event.
Talk more about the university standing up to the protests, saying the panel would move forward. And then, of course, you have the judge hearing this case yesterday, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, as I said, I've been the university has been steadfast in its defense of academic freedom. They try to take what they call a kind of content-neutral approach, saying this is not about this particular issue, but this is about the ability of the university and faculty to sponsor events that talk to the main issues of the day, as controversial as they may be. And the university has not budged from that at all. I have to tell you, I have not even heard from the chancellor, with any kind of concerns whatsoever. And I think that is a great credit to the university.
I want to turn right now to Rachel Weber, who is joining us from Western Massachusetts. She's an attorney and member of Jewish Voice for Peace of Western Massachusetts chapter. Can you talk about your involvement in the court case yesterday, Rachel?
I'm sorry, can
you talk about your involvement in the court case yesterday? What Jewish Voice for Peace, one of the co-sponsors of this event that is set to take place tomorrow, what you said to the court?
Certainly. So we intervened as defendants in the case because we wanted to make sure that the judge and the court was able to hear our concerns contesting the plaintiff's use of a definition of anti-Semitism that conflates anti-Semitism with any criticism of Israel. And so we argued to the court, first of all, that allowing the injunction absolutely would have been a prior restraint on free speech, which is impermissible according to the First Amendment, and the judge was very clear on that. And then we also argued to the judge, and both in front of in open court and also with our filings, that the plaintiff's use of a definition of anti-Semitism, which includes any criticism of Israel and any advocacy for Palestinians, is both incorrect, inflammatory, and offensive to Jews, Jewish communities, and also historically inaccurate.
We're going to break, and when we come back from our break, we're going to turn to Roger Waters, the legendary musician, co-founder of Pink Floyd. He's one of the panelists set to speak on Saturday. Stay with us. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome one day. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome one day. And we'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. Every faith and every man. One day. Shall overcome someday. And we'll tear down the prison walls. We will tear down those prison walls. Together we will tear down those prison walls on that day.
That's Roger Waters performing We Shall Overcome, accompanied by Alexander Roatan on cello in the Democracy Now! Studios. We Shall Overcome. It is Pete Seeger's, the 100th anniversary of the late, great folk singer and songwriter. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Not backing down. Israel, free speech, and the battle for Palestinian human rights. That's the title of the panel set to take place Saturday at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. 3 anonymous UMass students filed a lawsuit to stop the event, claiming they'll, quote, suffer irreparable harm if it takes place. But Judge Robert Ullman ruled on Thursday the event can proceed, saying, quote, there's nothing that comes even close to a threat of harm or incitement to violence or lawlessness. Meanwhile, the university's backed the event despite the protests, saying it's committed to the principles of free speech and academic freedom. So we're joined right now by Pink Floyd founder Roger Waters, who is one of the participants in that event. Welcome to Democracy Now! And talk about why you're doing this on Saturday and the significance of the court ruling.
Well, Sut asked me to come to his university to be on this panel, and I'm delighted to be able to do it. Thank you, Judge. He was very explicit and brief and to the point, and his ruling is obviously sound. My view is that it's a good thing that the organisations are attacking the event, because what it does is it serves to shine light on the predicament of the Palestinian people who we support. And the more light that is shone in any question of human rights, the better, in my view. So I'm very glad that they've failed. Though, in a way, if they had succeeded in their legal manoeuvres, that might have gone even further to shine light on the predicament of the Palestinians, which is what this is about. You know, something that I say at every show I do now, because I find my speeches down so they're very short, is at some point in everybody's life they have to decide whether or not they believe in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Paris. If you do, either you believe in it or you don't. You can't have it both ways. And so if you do believe it, then you have to stand up for people's human rights all over the world, irrespective of their ethnicity or their religion or their nationality, which is what we are doing in this panel at the University of Massachusetts on Saturday.
Can you talk about the backlash against pro-Palestinian voices, including the backlash that you, Roger Waters, have experienced as a musician, as a human rights activist, as you travel the world?
Well, this particular issue is far more divisive than any other. So I've just been on tour for a couple of years all over the world, and in many countries, certainly in Europe, in France and in Germany, I came up against an absolute wall of silence, really, particularly in Germany, where nobody in the press, until I spoke to one journalist with a newspaper from Munich, nobody would speak to me, on the grounds that they'd been told that I was anti-Semitic and that I could not be spoken to. And the Germans are very sensitive about Jewish affairs. And in consequence, they are not open to even speaking about human rights within the context of Palestine.
Can you talk about the equation of being critical of the Israeli government with anti-Semitism?
Well, I could talk about it, yeah, but what's the point? So much...
Respond to it.
Okay, well, it's quite clearly criticism of any government is nothing to do with anti-Semitism, and certainly criticism of the Israeli government's flouting of international law and abuses of human rights has nothing to do with the Jewish faith or Jewish people. I've had lots of meetings all over the world with JVP-sponsored events.
Jewish Voice for Peace.
Actually, we did one in... the first one we did after I left the States was in Vancouver, and it wasn't JVP, but it was another Jewish organization, I can't remember, something other voices. And of course, they are just as humane and care just as much about human rights as everybody else does who cares about human rights. Unfortunately, the Israeli government does not care about human rights, and neither does this government in this country, which is why this administration is supporting the annexing of the Golan Heights and the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem and blah, 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 and all the rest of it. So it is very important that those of us who do care, organize, meet, have meetings, and continue to protest the situation of our Palestinian friends.
I wanted to bring Rachel Weber back into this conversation to address this particular issue of equating being critical of the state of Israel, of the current government in Israel, with being anti-Semitic. You're an attorney and member of Jewish Voice for Peace.
Yes. Zionism is a political movement. And from the very beginning of that movement in the late 19th century, there's been dissent within Jewish communities around whether or not Zionism was a good idea. And in fact, right around when the Balfour Declaration was about to be enacted, which gave a mandate for essentially was the beginnings of the establishment of the State of Israel through the British mandate, there were several prominent Jewish members of the British Jewish community that issued a statement in the Times of London about how this was a dangerous idea. So there's been discussion and debate and disagreement about Zionism from the very beginning within Jewish communities. So to say that all Jews feel that the Israeli government speaks for them is again, it's inaccurate and it's incredibly offensive. I have an absolute obligation to protest injustices that are happening in my name, both as a Jew and as an American, given the amount of aid and military resources that this country gives to Israel. It's actually quite offensive to suggest that just because of the identities of the people who are running the government in Israel, that because I share some heritage with those people's identities, that I would support anything that they do. And there's a growing voice in this country and around the world of Jews saying Israel does not speak for us, and we have to speak up against the human rights abuses that are happening against Palestinians. And to say that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, it's incredibly dangerous, and it's actually bad for Jews because it prevents us from doing the hard work that has to happen to contest white supremacy. White supremacy is what is dangerous for Jews in this country and around the world. And when we use a definition of anti-Semitism that includes criticism of Israel, that actually divides us from internally. It's a huge divide within the Jewish community in this country, and it also separates us from allies in working together to fight white supremacy. So it's actually it's dangerous, obviously, for Palestinians, because it makes anyone who stands up for Palestinian rights fear that they're going to be accused of being anti-Semitic and smeared, just like in this lawsuit. And it's also dangerous for Jews because it prevents us from working together internally and with allies to fight white supremacy. I
want to bring in Set Jolly again from the University of Massachusetts, professor of communications, head of the Media Education Foundation. According to reports, you'd hoped to bring the Palestinian leader and activist Hanan Ashrawi, but she didn't receive a visa in time. Is this true, and what do you understand happened?
Yes, it's very true. When I was organizing the event, I sent an invitation to Hanan Ashrawi, and she replied and said she very much wanted to come, but she was waiting for a visa, and that she would be back in touch with me, if she got the visa. And she got back in touch with me about 2 months later and said that she could not include the United States in anything she was going to do because she was not receiving a visa. And so, Hanan has been coming to the United States for decades. And I don't know if people know, but, she's a famed Palestinian legislator, elected representative of the Palestinian people. And she cannot now come into the country to talk about the issues that confront Palestinians. And this goes along with just 2 weeks ago, Marwan Barghouti, the co-founder of BDS, was denied a visa to come in. So I think what is happening at UMass is a kind of microcosm of what's happening everywhere. There is this kind of intense pressure now to make sure that the pro-Palestinian voices or any kind of rational discussion of Israel-Palestine does not happen. At UMass, it's to do with, it's the phone calls, it's the letters that came in, it's the lawsuit. And I think this is an act of desperation on their part. For example, they knew the injunction would never stop this event from taking place. And so the question is, why did they go through with it? Why did they spend the thousands of dollars on the lawyers to go, to go through the courts? And I think it was not an attempt to stop this event because they knew they couldn't. It was an act of intimidation and bullying for the next one. To tell people, if you start to think about organizing events around this or start speaking out about this, this is what's going to come down on you. And I think they're petrified. I think they are terrified of the coalitions that are being building between Palestinian students and Jewish students in organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine. They're terrified of the links that are taking place between the battle for black liberation in the United States and the battle for liberation in Palestine. And they want to destroy those and make sure that those voices are not heard through intimidation and threat. But the name of our panel is called Not Backing Down. Because I think we're in a new moment right now where there is a space for different kinds of voices to come through. And people are not backing down and are forcing this conversation into the mainstream.
That was actually Omar Barghouti, one of the organizers of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, who was not allowed into the United States, despite the fact that he's come here many other times and was also coming for his daughter's wedding. People can see the interview we did with him at democracynow.org. We also recently spoke to Noam Chomsky, the world-renowned political dissident, linguist, and author. He said Democrats are supporting Palestinian rights more now than in the past. He said times have changed.
The support for Israeli expansionism, repression, the whole alliance that's developing, that support has shifted in the United States from the more liberal sectors, roughly the Democratic Party, to the far right. Not very long ago, support for Israel was based passionately in the liberal sectors of the population. It was a democratic issue. It isn't anymore. In fact, if you look at in the polls, people who identify themselves as liberal, as Democrats, by now tend to support Palestinian rights more than Israel. That's a dramatic change. Support for Israel now is in the most reactionary parts of the population. Evangelical Christians, ultranationalists, basically it's a far-right issue. Among younger people, this is even more the case.
That was Noam Chomsky, who had just returned to Boston, to Massachusetts. I was interviewing him at the Old South Church there, about 1,000 people packed into the church. Roger Waters, do you feel that kind of optimism? That, I mean, here Noam Chomsky has been so critical of the Israeli state for so long, and yet he says he feels there is a different climate right now.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been involved in this struggle only for the last 12 years, but over those 12 years, it has changed dramatically. And Noam Chomsky is exactly right. And so is Sut. They are desperate now. That's why they pulled this silly legal stunt about this meeting in UMass. And I'm so happy to see it. And working with people from Jewish Voice for Peace and other Jewish organizations as well has developed dramatically over the years as the demographic within the Jewish community in the United States has changed, and they're coming more and more round to saying, not in my name, and which is hugely encouraging. Yeah, I feel overcome almost with joy, even to be able to speak about it in these terms now. And I'm really looking forward to Saturday in Massachusetts and having, speaking to young people and meeting also the other panelists, all of whom I'm admire.
Mm-hmm. Why risk this criticism? I mean, you are a world-renowned musician. And yet you take this on everywhere you go. Mm-hmm. Why?
My mum. You know, my mother, when I was young, at one point, she said to me, you know, at some point in your life, you're going to be faced with difficult decisions. You should think about things, find out as much as you can about anything that you're confronted with, then make up your own mind what it is that you're going to do. There's nearly always the right thing to do. Just do it. This is the right thing to do, and I'm just doing it. So there's never any sort of question about it.
And what message do you have to other musicians and artists?
Get on board. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of my colleagues in my industry are still very frightened of the industry and of the power in the industry of the Israeli lobby. Just the same as members of Congress are still terrified of AIPAC and the people who fund their elections. And so that is still there, but it's diminishing.
It's been quite remarkable to see the number of Democratic presidential candidates who did not address AIPAC this year.
It was a huge change, yeah, and hugely encouraging to us all.
Well, I want to thank you all for being with us. Roger Waters, co-founder of Pink Floyd, Sat Jale, University of Massachusetts Amherst professor, founder of the Media Education Foundation, and Rachel Weber, attorney and member of Jewish Voice for Peace of Western Massachusetts. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in 30 seconds.